Well, hello there. Thank you for joining me today. I actually had a shocking moment recently. I was just getting ready to finish up a show, so I figured out why all those founders of Israel came out of Russia. Interesting story also about how they reformed the calendar and all that. But I thought, well, I think I'll look into circumcision between the U.S. and Israel. Something on that map hit me differently this time because obviously I've looked at the map of what regions circumcise more men than other areas. And, well, for some reason, I must have kind of thought in my head, and that's why thinking really isn't research, right? I thought, well, maybe the African nations or that area over there, maybe it's because, I don't know, maybe they've been tricked into circumcision over this HIV thing. And something really hit me. No, it's not that. It's not the HIV. I found it so shocking that over 95% of Muslim men have undergone circumcision, a practice adopted so widely it's often unquestioned despite its irreversible nature and the complex origins. And speaking about complex origins, this one really takes the cake because the clip you just heard in the intro was about how many days after birth to circumcise, and they were talking in the Muslim world. Well, Jewish boys are circumcised on the 8th day after birth in a religious ceremony known as the Brit Milah. This is a mandatory covenantal ritual in both Orthodox and most conservative Jewish practice, meaning mandatory, okay? Now, those Ashkenazi Jews interested, and they have a rate of 90 some percent, the regular Jewish. But the Ashkenazi Jews or the Gypsies, they have 100% conversion rate to circumcision. Why is that interesting? Well, because it'll get more interesting here in a bit, because where did they get this idea for circumcision? Sure, it comes from the religious community, right? But who runs the religious community? So I traced it back because I read this report about Barack Obama and the Muslim Brotherhood. He wanted to give the Muslim Brotherhood and have the people work with the Muslim Brotherhood to advance our causes in the Middle East. And I thought, Muslim Brotherhood, what's this about? So I took a look. Well, the Muslim Brotherhood was very big into pushing circumcision. How big? I would say hugely big into pushing circumcision. Well, when did the Muslim Brotherhood come into effect? Well, interesting timing, you should ask. So let me just keep going here. So it's interesting that among Ashkenazi, remember Nazis, the Jews, circumcision is still practiced today at nearly 100%. Pretty high numbers, right? So, needless to say, I went off on this whole thing about circumcision, and this show is going to be about penises. I'm sorry to tell you, but we got to not ignore things just about our own bodies. We have beautiful bodies. Let's not duck and hide the reality, okay? So what happened with this circumcision thing? I don't know. I'm still finding it just kind of shocking. Why? Because of how evil the whole thing has been and still going on right now till today. So let me scroll down here. So circumcision is a cosmetic ritual altercation. It's different than castration, which is removal of sexual and hormonal function. Some critics of circumcision argue it is a form of genital mutilation, particularly when done without consent, because babies cannot consent. So I have a couple of reports, and first, I don't want to bury the lead. So let's talk first about these Muslim Brotherhood people. Where'd they come from? Well, they came straight out of this basement of the CIA. So, anyhow, so I was circling around these Muslim Brotherhood people. They're the ones that created these Arab Spring. And it's all been a plot to wipe out the Muslim population. If you remember my last show, I was talking about how they use this whole anti-Semitism thing to put the fox in the hen house right there in the Middle East. So Israel is the United States, really. It's there to guard the hen house, and they are the fox, right? So let me just read this. So then I found on the blog world, those people are geniuses over there. So I started looking further into this Muslim Brotherhood, like where exactly did they start? Because I'm always saying start at the beginning. Well, they have an absolutely fascinating beginning. So, in other words, if you got castrated, not castrated, circumcised in the Middle East or that region, it was being aggressively pushed by the USA. Bottom line. Okay. So let me read this first page that I found. This report examines claims and narratives that suggest a deep-rooted ideological and structural connection between the Muslim Brotherhood and Freemasonry, placing both in a larger historical and geopolitical context that includes Zionist aspirations, colonial manipulation, and secret societies like the Knights Templar. Okay, Freemasonry, origins and structure. Freemasonry is a secret fraternal organization often traced to Hiram Abib, the biblical architect of Solomon's temple. The Knights Templar, a Catholic military order active during the Crusades, also responsible for the beginning of Freemasonry. Also, Anderson's Constitution, 1723, written by James Anderson, formalized Masonic decree rooted in Old Testament values and Jewish symbolism. Freemasonry promotes universal brotherhood, right? Enlightened values, global unification of beliefs under symbolic structures. Critics argue its goals include the dissolution of religious distinctiveness to enable global control, allegedly consistent with themes in the protocols of the elders in Zion. Yeah, this is one whole going to be in their minds, okay, one big religion. So Freemasons' goals and religious manipulation. The organization has been accused of operating through ambiguity, symbolism, and hidden agendas, undermining national and religious identities, promoting global governance aligned with Zionist and Talmudic principles, exploiting spiritual language for political and financial gains. The Muslim Brotherhood, its founding and ideological roots. It was founded in 1928 in Egypt by Hassan al-Banna. Its claimed purpose, Islamic revival and resistance to secularism and Western imperialism. However, some researchers argue this: the Brotherhood is not purely Islamic, but a derivative of pre-Masonic organization and ideology, created with help from colonial and Zionist intelligence networks. So, the link between Freemasonry and the Muslim Brotherhood. Afghan thinker Jamal al-Dia he's an Iranian Shiite by background, is cited as a key bridge. He was president of a Masonic lodge in Egypt, as that's the main people, alleged to be British intelligence collaborator. He roamed freely under colonial empires, traveling through India, Russia, Europe, and the Ottoman Empire. His student, Hassan al-Banna, adopted much of his organizational strategy, allegedly forming the Brotherhood using three Masonic principles of brotherhood, secrecy, and hierarchy. Egyptian lawyer, I can't pronounce his name, a former Brotherhood member, has written extensively on the organization's similarities between Freemasonry and the Muslim Brotherhood. Secret initiation ranks. absolute loyalty among brothers, rejection of national allegiance in favor of a universal ideology. Brotherhood aims align with Freemasonic globalist vision, the erosion of state borders and religion distinctions under one dignified ideological order. So, the Brotherhood and the alleged Masonic ties. This Hassan guy, the Brotherhood leader after the Albana guy, accused of Masonic ties by critics such as Sheikh Mohammed Al-Ghazi. So, in 1943, there was an essay allegedly titled Why I Became a Mason, suggests his ideological flirtation. His later extremism laid the foundation for Al-Qaeda and ISIS ideologies, which mirror radical interpretations of purification in both Freemasonry and Tafriqi thought. Arab revolutions and Freemasonic strategy. The 2011 Arab Spring is seen by critics as engineered chaos using sectarianism and popular unrest, promoted by Qatar and Iran, aligned with Israeli geopolitical interests. A continuation of the divide and conquer strategy linked to Freemasonic and Zionist agendas, designed to fragment the Middle East into weak, manageable states. Historical origins, the Knights Templar and the Temple of Solomon. The Knights Templar, founded in 1118 AD in Jerusalem, originally claimed to protect Christian pilgrims. However, they amassed immense wealth, engaged in usury, and were accused of heresy. After their suppression in 1307 to 1314, notably under King Philip of France, survivors allegedly regrouped under Masonic guilds. By infiltrating operative stonemason guilds in Britain, the Templars are believed to have morphed into speculative Freemasonry. Their obsession with Solomon's Temple carried forward the mystic, Kabbalistic, and esoteric traditional embedded in modern Masonic rituals. Freemasonry today is considered by some scholars to be an extension of the Templar cult repackaged for Enlightenment era secrecy, still deeply tied to Zionist political aspirations and globalist frameworks. A network through which ideologies like the Muslim Brotherhood are promoted under religious or revolutionary banners. The narrative suggests the Muslim Brotherhood is not simply an Islamic movement, but rather a Freemason Zionist creation designed to fragment Islamic unity from within, co-opt religious language for geopolitical manipulations, and advance a long-term project of global control aligned with Freemasonic and Zionist ideologies. The Brotherhood's hierarchical structure, slogans of universal brotherhood, disregard for national borders, and susceptibility to foreign influence echo Freemasonic principles. Its legacy through figures like Kabab continues to influence radical movements today. So yeah, it's interesting because at the beginning of Al-Qaeda and all of this was in fact the Brotherhood. So we've already been through all this, the fact that Al-Qaeda and them are all extensions of the USA, but it all got started with the Brotherhood. Ding, 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 exactly around the time that they took over and reorganized the Middle East. So anyway, so here's another report that I found. I just did synopsis of them, but I have the full reports over on my website and tons of links over there. This report explores the origins and growth of Islamic terrorism, with emphasis on the ideological, political, and strategic factors that influenced the formation and global spread of militant Islam. It argues that the emergence of radical Islamic movements, especially the Muslim Brotherhood, was not an organic phenomenon, but a strategically manipulated development involving British imperialism, Freemasonry, and globalist interests. While the West and East have seen religious decline, the Middle East has experienced a revival of Islamic identity. This revival is not coincidental, but reflects deliberate manipulation by global elites to use militant Islam as a political tool. Origins of the Muslim Brotherhood, founded in 1928, and remember, I'll get back to another timeline in a second here, but it's right around the time that they split up Middle East. So founded in 1928 by Hassan al-Banna in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood emerged as the most influential Sunni revivalist organization of the 20th century. Banna's formative years were shaped by Sufi practices and connections with reformist Islamic figures linked to Freemasonry, such as Jam al-Din and Muhammad Abduh. So allegations persist that the Muslim Brotherhood was created or influenced by British intelligence and Masonic networks. Egypt, under British rule, was home to many Masonic lodges, which included aristocrats and Islamic reformers. Abduh, an Islamic scholar and Grand Mufti of Egypt, was also the Grand Masonic Master of Egypt. These networks advanced economic and political agendas, including legitimizing banking practices like usury under Islam. Muslim Brotherhood's ideological network. The structure mirrored Freemasonry, secret cells, hierarchical leadership, and Brotherhood loyalty. Despite early cooperation with British rulers, Muslim Brotherhood turned radical and anti-colonial in the 1930s and 40s. That's how it always works, right? So that's how they separate themselves. It's going on right now in real time on social media. You got tons of people say, "Oh, I never said that, never said that. I really liked Israel. I didn't like Israel all along. I just don't talk to me about this." So yeah, so they get it going, and then what they do is they pretend to be anti-colonial, right, in the 30s and 40s. So after accusations of political violence, including the assassination of Egyptian officials, the Muslim Brotherhood was banned and driven underground in 1948. Banna was assassinated in 1949. Successive leaders operated under state repression. By the 1950s, Muslim Brotherhood clashed with Egyptian nationals over Nasser and sought support from Western intelligence services. So yes, they sought support from Western intelligence services. Well, they were getting support all along, but it's good that they're documenting it, right? So there's a whole list of people, and I have them all on my website. I'm not going to even attempt to go down and try to say their name, but it's all the people that started this Muslim Brotherhood. And who are the Western elites in population control? Influential figures and institutions like Bertrand Russell, Julian Huxley, Kissinger, the Club of Rome, saw population growth and industrialization as threats. Yeah, get those Muslims under control. Strategies included environmental alarmists, population control policies, and fostering internal conflict in developing nations. There's this thing called the arc of crisis strategy. The term was coined by Brzezinski, referring to the destabilization of the Middle East from Pakistan to North Africa. Western elites used militant Islam to halt secular modernization and suppress industrial growth in Muslim nations. Supported Islamic groups through intelligence networks and institutions like Islamic Council of Europe and Islamic Foundation in Leicester. Brotherhood expansion and offshoots. So it started in Egypt, okay? Then it spread into Syria, Pakistan, Iran, and Gaza. Linked to Islamic jihadists, Hamas. You know, Hamas, the one that's doing everything. Hamas is actually part of the Brotherhood, but let me keep reading here. So it is linked to jihad, Hamas, and terrorist activities across the Middle East. It actually has established bases in London and Geneva, supported by the Saudi funding and CIA operations in Afghanistan. And also, Osama bin Laden, he came out of the Muslim Brotherhood part. And so the Muslim Brotherhood also founded Al Qaeda. Anyway, so yeah, that was sponsored by the bin Laden family fortune and CIA backed operations. And that developed global jihad networks rooted in Muslim Brotherhood ideology. The rise of Islamic terrorism is deeply intertwined with the Muslim Brotherhood and its ideological forebears. Far from being a grassroots religious revival, it has been shaped and manipulated by Western imperial powers, intelligence agencies, and Masonic networks to serve geopolitical objectives, destabilize nationalist movements, and control third world development. The Muslim Brotherhood remains the ideological core of global Islamic militancy with financial, political, and religious networks that continue to shape conflicts today. So, first we had the Sykes-Picot, which was when they reorganized the Middle East. Then in 1928, the Muslim Brotherhood was founded in Egypt by Hassan al-Banna. 1945, Brotherhood formally established in Jordan. 1940s to 60s, Brotherhood spreads informally into Palestine, West Bank, and Gaza. 1970s to 80s, increasing coordination between Pakistani and Jordanian branches. 1987, Hamas, you know, those people they can't keep talking about? Hamas founded as a Palestinian arm of the Muslim Brotherhood. Well, we can't get any food to them because Hamas is stealing all the food. Well, Hamas, aka the USA. So anyway, so I actually loop back around because when I started this whole thing, when I look at that map and realize that why are all those people in all those countries getting circumcised, it dawned on me it was something else because I found this piece by President Obama, and that's what got me onto the Muslim Brotherhood train. He did a directive ordering Washington government agencies to prepare for change. The change was about to be a radical policy, calling for Washington's backing for the secret fundamental Islamic Muslim Brotherhood sect across the Middle East Muslim world, and with it, unleashing a reign of terror that would change the entire world. I'm Barack Obama. I won the Nobel Peace Prize for peace. You see how it all works? They brought in the black guy, right? The first black president to unleash this horror on the Middle East because everybody, well, I can't speak for everybody else, but I do know myself speaking that I got wise to Obama. And if you said anything about Obama, what are you, some kind of a racist? You embarrassed to be? We have a first African American president, and you're sitting there sounding like some kind of white racist there, Diane. Can't you do better than this? Well, yeah, I can do better. Just turn me loose, right? So yeah, that was part of the Obama plot was it made it very hard to say anything about the black guy, right? And the black guy unleashed all of this murder on the Middle East. They have been doing to Yemen what they're doing to Gaza right now for a very long time, thanks to Barack Hussein Obama. So anyway, so yeah, I read this administrative thing saying we're going to work with the Muslim Brotherhood. So a resulting presidential directive ordered American diplomats to make contact with top Muslim Brotherhood leaders and gave active support to the organization's drive for power in key nations like Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, and Syria at the 2011 onset of the Arab Spring. The PDS-11 secret paper came to the bizarre conclusion that the Muslim Brotherhood's brand of political Islam, combined with its fervent nationalism, could lead to reform and stability. It was a lie well known to the Obama PSD-11 task force members. Well, yeah, you have to cover the lie. So if somebody ever says, well, why did you work with the Muslim Brotherhood? Well, we were forced into it. So the mother, excuse me, the mother, wait, I'm continuing reading now. The mother, the Muslim Brotherhood of Ekane, Arabic for the Brotherhood, is a secret Masonic-like organization with a covert or underground terrorist arm and a public facade of peaceful doing of charity. It was founded in Egypt in 1928 by Hassan al-Banna, who developed the cult's guiding motto. The credo of his Society of Muslim Brothers was incorporated into a chant of 6 short phrases. Allah is our goal. And keep in mind, I mean no disrespect to anyone in the Middle East. I am not joking around here. I'm just trying to relay what research I found. I did not target this information, nor am I looking for this information. I happen to have found this information, but it has nothing to do with me being anti anything. I am pro people that are not psychopaths. So just keep that in mind, okay? If you're not a psychopath, then I'm on your side. This is the 6 short phrases. Allah is our goal. The Prophet is our leader. The Quran is our constitution. Jihad is our way. Death in the service of Allah is the loftiest of our wishes. Allah is great. Allah is great. Al-Banna created a secret or hidden arm of Al-Qaeda in Egypt and later worldwide, known as the Special Section, and that's spelled IKHWAN, and that's a special section, or as it was referred to by the British in Egypt, the secret apparatus. This was the military wing of the Brotherhood, in effect, the Assassination Bureau. Al-Banna taught his recruits, exclusively male, that jihad is an obligation of every Muslim. He preached the nobility of death in the service of Allah and wrote, Allah grants a noble life to that nation which knows how to die a noble death. Kind of interesting, they're teaching people how to die. This is a kill box, and so they're getting people to getting people to accept they're going to be killing each other, right? So he preached a death cult in which victory can only come with the mastery of the art of death. For the Brotherhood, that mastery was perfected in the killing of infidels in jihad or holy war in the name of Allah. The infidels could be other Muslims, such as Shiite or Sufi, who did not follow al-Banna's strict Sunni practice or Christians. Hassan al-Banna called for adoption of the very strict Islamic Shia law, the complete segregation of male and female students, with a separate curriculum for girls, a prohibition of dancing, and a call for Islamic states to eventually unify in a caliphate. During World War II, leading Muslim Brotherhood figures spent exile from British-controlled Egypt by fleeing to Berlin, where, among others, al-Banna's close Muslim Brotherhood ally, Amin al-Hussein, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, worked intimately with the SS and Heinrich Himmler to create the Special Brotherhood Terror Unit of the SS, so-called Hanskar SS, to kill Soviet soldiers and Jews. In the 1950s, the CIA discovered the Nazi Muslim Brotherhood recruits in exile in post-war Munich and decided they could be useful. Virtually every major jihadist terrorist organization and leaders has come out of the Muslim Brotherhood. Osama bin Laden, who worked for the CIA in Pakistan, recruited jihadist mujahideen to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan and was a Muslim Brotherhood member who was recruited by the CIA and Saudi intelligence head Prince Turki Pasay to create what came to be called Al-Qaeda. Other known terrorist members of the Ikhwan were Al-Qaeda's Ayman Zawahiri and the blind Sheikh Omar Rahman, who recently died in the U.S. prison serving time for his role in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. Sheikh Omar was accused of conspiring to assassinate Egypt's Mubarak and masterminding the Muslim Brotherhood assassination of Anwar Sadat, in addition to the bombing of the World Trade Center. The members of the Obama administration National Security Council PSD-11 task force that recommended a U.S. government embrace of the terrorist Muslim Brotherhood in Islamic countries of the Arab Middle East knew very well who they were dealing with. Since the 1950s, the CIA had worked with the Al-Qaeda around the world, Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda in Iraq and in Syria, a Nusra Front in Syria, as well as the so-called Islamic State or ISIS. All were created out of Muslim Brotherhood networks, changing names as a chameleon lizard changes color to suit its surroundings. The origins of Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Syria, and later of ISIS, the murderous war and chaos sweeping across the Arab Middle East and into Western Europe since 2010, could all be directly traced back to those Washington Obama policies. Their so-called Arab Spring coming from August 2010 PSD-11 Presidential Task Force Directive. This is what threatens to come out with declassification of U.S. Justice Department files in the coming months. Some in Washington speak of treason, a strong word. So let me give you a timeline. It all started 1916. Got another set of dates here, right? That was when the Sykes-Picot Agreement was signed during World War I. It was a secret deal between Britain and France to divide up the Ottoman Empire's Arab provinces. 1928. Muslim Brotherhood was founded in Egypt by Hassan al-Banna more than a decade after Sykes-Picot. So my question was did the Muslim Brotherhood start pushing circumcision? Not exactly. Circumcision was already deeply ingrained in Islamic tradition long before the Brotherhood existed. Circumcision had been practiced since the 7th century across Muslim lands as a sunnah, a prophetic tradition, nearly universal among males in the Middle East, North Africa, and South Asia, even before the 20th century. The Brotherhood did not invent or newly promote circumcision, but it did re-emphasize Islamic identity and traditional practices as part of its broader vision. So in the 1930s to 50s, as colonial and secular nationalist movements grew, the Brotherhood positioned itself as a religious counterforce, upholding rituals like prayer, modesty, charity, and circumcision as essential components of Islamic identity. What the Brotherhood do? They promoted systematic Islamic education. Well, you can only imagine what that education was, right? If you understand that the Muslim Brotherhood was totally invented, you have to wonder what kind of systematic Islamic education were they preaching, right? Their emphasis was on ritual observance in contrast to secular and westernization. They used Islamic practices like circumcision as symbols of belonging and moral purity, especially in places like Egypt, Jordan, and Palestine. So while not the originators, the Brotherhood helped standardize and intensify religious adherence, including circumcision, especially in urban, poor, or politically mobilized populations where Western and secular influence was growing. So essentially, the Muslim Brotherhood was founded in 1928, well, within 10 years after Sykes-Picot died. Circumcision was already a core Islamic tradition long before the Brotherhood existed. The Brotherhood did not introduce circumcision, but reinforced it as part of a broader religious revival in the face of colonial and secular forces in the 20th century. So, it also could be that around the early 1920s and 30s, people were possibly moving away from circumcision. But remember, all the data they're talking about prior to 1920s, they came up with all these datas, right? So whether they were doing it a lot prior to the Muslim Brotherhood or not, I really don't know because they say Islamic practice was fragmented or lax in some regions pre-1920s. The colonial influence of British, French, and Italian had diluted or marginalized many Islamic practices in urban and elite classes. In Egypt, for example, early 20th century elites were Western educated, secularizing, and often apathetic toward ritual observation. In some rural or tribal societies, the timing or ritual strictness of circumcision varied. Some boys were circumcised very late, or not at all if they lived far away from clerical authority. This creates a context in which a reformist Islamic movement like the Brotherhood would see an opportunity and a threat to core identity. So it was founded in response to moral decay and secularism. Then we had the collapse of the Ottoman Caliphate in 1924. So the Brotherhood promoted strict religious observations, daily prayer, the hijab, modesty, Sharia law, and circumcision as a prophetic obligation and marker of Muslim male identity. In Brotherhood teachings, circumcision was not optional, It was commanded as part of an Islamic way of life, though technically not even in the Quran. So revivalist movements use ritual to reinforce identity. This is a common pattern. When a group feels its identity is under threat, they intensify ritual boundaries. Brotherhood literature and grassroots preaching reinvigorated circumcision as a non-negotiable male right. This was especially important in places where Muslims coexisted with non-Muslims. So it was less strictly enforced than was prior to the Brotherhood. So because medicalization, which was circumcision in hospitals, had not yet taken root in rural areas. So, yeah, it's historically reasonable to argue that the Muslim Brotherhood helped revive or intensify the enforcement of circumcision as a religious command during a time when Islamic practices were fragmenting under Western influence. Rituals were becoming optional among modernized elites. National and religious identity were under pressure. They likely saw circumcision as a core symbolic act to reassert Islamic identity, not just medically, but spiritually and politically. So, in rural and poor communities, the timing and ritual quality could vary, and there were likely outliers who delayed or skipped it entirely. So, that is what they have. So, circumcision as a foundational rite, they framed it not as an optional tradition, but as a religious duty and symbol of belonging to the Muslim community. Yeah, I'd say they pretty much forced it, right? While Brotherhood sources rarely published explicit rulings on male circumcision, their broader ideological, excuse me, let me start over. While Brotherhood sources rarely published explicit rulings on male circumcision, their broader ideology clearly treats it as an obligation. So, after coming to power, for example, in 2012, the Brotherhood's Freedom and Justice Party reportedly operated medical caravans offering circumcision services to men and women, even for a nominal fee to promote the practice. So, yeah, I'd say they were on board with the circumcision thing. This Sheik guy, a leading Brotherhood aligned cleric, described female circumcision as preferable to pleasing to God, reflecting their broader dive to normalizing ritual purity and tradition. In 1981, the Brotherhood Mufti Muhammad Kabeg issued a fatwa stating that when Islam arrived, it approved this operation for males and females, integrating both religious and purported medical rationale. So, yeah, I think that it all got going under the Muslim Brotherhood, right? And all these other groups got started also. Al Qaeda, all of them they coordinated with the Nazis, the Muslim Brotherhood did. So, yeah, I would have to say that pretty good evidence. I would say pretty good evidence that they were there. So, because right, all that colonialism, they come in and say, "Oh, we're gonna down with the elites. We're gonna rule this area ourselves." Now everybody line up and get circumcised, right? I'm gonna put this on hold for a second. Okay, so circumcision was presented as a mark of religious loyalty, a means to preserve Islamic moral purity, a visible boundary against secularism and non-Muslim identity. Well, my opinion is that This was a way that they could control the men in the Middle East. You're saying, well, why would they control men by circumcision? Well, there's a lot to this story, so let me just keep going here. So, so we had 1916, 1924, Ottoman Empire goes away, 1928, founding of the Muslim Brotherhood, 1930 to 40s, Brotherhood expansion and Nazi collaboration, 1950s, Brotherhood exile and the CIA interest, 1979, Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. They sicked the Brotherhood on them. That was Osama bin Laden deal. 1987, Hamas. Hamas is doing it all. Established as the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood during the First Intifada. Combines political Islam, militancy, and social services. Considered a terrorist group by Israel, the U.S., and the EU. Oh, sure they do, right? Sure they do. So, Hamas, 1987. 1988, Al Qaeda was formed. That was formed by Osama bin Laden. Al Qaeda aimed to globalize jihad and target the far enemy, primarily the USA. It's kind of like the USA attacking the USA, right? 1993, World Trade Center bombing. Here again, Muslim Brotherhood, a precursor to more significant jihadist attacks against the West. The West attacks the West, right? 2001, 9/11 attacks coordinated by Al Qaeda under Osama bin Laden triggered the U.S.-led war on terror, targeting Al Qaeda and Taliban forces in Afghanistan. You know, if it weren't so tragic, a really good case could be made for this could turn into just a fantastically funny black humor skit, right? We have this skit, we have all the characters that are playing dual roles. So 2003 to 10, the rise of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. After the U.S. invasion of Iraq, jihadists began sectarian warfare. So Al-Qaeda becomes a precursor to ISIS. 2011, the Arab Spring and that PSD-11 business, the Obama administration Presidential Study Directive -11 or PSD-11 orders U.S. agencies to reassess support for political change in the Arab world. U.S. begins engagement with the Muslim Brotherhood in countries like Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, and Syria. Brotherhood-backed governments briefly take power in some Arab Spring countries like Egypt's Morsi government. 2013, Egyptian military overthrows the Brotherhood government. So, a Brotherhood leader and Egypt's first democratically elected president is removed by the military. The Brotherhood is outlawed in Egypt. Get those Brotherhoods out of here. 2014, the rise of ISIS emerges from Al-Qaeda in Iraq under this Abu Baba declares a caliphate, capturing large territories in Iraq and Syria. Uses Brotherhood-style ideological roots with more extreme tactics and a global recruitment strategy. 2015 to present, ISIS expansion and collapse. ISIS spreads globally through affiliates in Libya, West Africa, Southeast Asia. Its coalition military efforts disseminate its territory by 2019, but sleeper cells and ideology persist. So the Muslim Brotherhood provided the ideological foundation, the Sharia law, jihad, Islamic governance. The Al-Qaeda, formed by Brotherhood affiliate figures like bin Laden, globalized the jihad movement. ISIS evolved from Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And you think they couldn't have possibly written up that Bible, right? They wrote up this whole story in the Middle East, right? Got these Muslim Brotherhood people over there. We better coordinate with them. Even though the United States created them, right? So you can't tell me they wrote this whole story about how to, now first we're going to have the Muslim Brotherhood. And once things get going with them, we'll have another conference, and during that conference, we'll think, hey, the Muslim Brotherhood is doing a fantastic job at the place we house them, but we need another division to shred more terror. Let's come up with Al Qaeda, and we'll run them in this area over here. Nobody will ever guess it was us. And then when they get Al Qaeda going, let's get ISIS going, after our favorite goddess. Yeah, ISIS, that's the name for us. We'll pick ISIS as the name, and we'll visibly come in contact with these Brotherhood people. Nah, I don't think so. So where does all this stuff come from? These people have a fascination. I mean, a fascination to the point of, I would say, an obsession with penises, right? All this business with circumcision and stuff, right? Well, who has who has the biggest penis symbol in the world? Well, none other than Washington, D.C. Well, and here's another date we can look at. Washington, D.C. has the tallest, they call it an obelisk, okay? And you're thinking, we've heard about this. Well, let's just review what we know about this obelisk, okay? Because today we're going to cover penises from A to Z, okay? So, the oblique or big tall penis symbol they have in Washington, D.C. is 555 feet tall. Its material is marble, granite, and bluestone genesis. Construction, pay attention to this date. It's like they're planting their territory, right? The construction began in 1948. It was paused during the Civil War. Completed in 1884 and opened in 1888. So it was built to honor George Washington, the first U.S. president, in its location, the National Mall in Washington, D.C. So where did they get this huge penis-like thing we're calling an oblique? Well, it wasn't imported from Egypt. Unlike ancient Egyptian obelisks in cities like Paris, London, and New York, the Washington Monument is not an ancient Egyptian artifact. It was inspired by Egypt. Its shape was inspired by ancient Egyptian obelisks, which were typically erected to honor pharaohs and gods. It was designed by Robert Mills, a prominent 19th century architect. So, interesting date when it was completed, right? The obelisk as a phallic symbol. The obelisk originated in ancient Egypt, or so they say, right? And remember, I would believe a lot more of this stuff if the pyramids were actually real, right? But there's so many things about Egypt, the way they ferociously protected history in those museums and stuff. So just ask yourself this today while you're listening to me yap, yap, yap. If you still believe the Bible is real, you think these people that cooked up this entire thing with all these phallic symbols and all this stuff, it's not possible they couldn't have invented this whole history starting in the 1700s? So let's look at what is the obelisk. It did that the style itself supposedly originated in ancient Egypt, whatever that was, right? Where it was a sacred symbol associated with the sun god Ra, just like his Ra-El. In those esoteric traditions, obelisks are often interpreted as phallic symbols, representing male energy, fertility, and power, or power. This symbolic association is particularly strong in Freemasonry, occult philosophies, and psychoanalytical interpretations, such as those by Freud, who often linked towering structures with subconscious phallic symbolism. The shape, tall, erect, tapering to a point, is visually and metaphorically suggestive of male genitalia in many cultures. The Washington Monument is both the largest obelisk and a structure loaded with symbolic meaning. Whether seen as a tribute to a founding father, a solar symbol, or a hidden representation of masculine power, it reflects layers of cultural and historical interpretations. Phallic symbols can be found in many cultures around the world, Bhutan, they have dancers that wear masks featuring big red noses and wield wooden penises. In Japan, they have another festival, a giant wood carving of a penis. During the festival, phallus-shaped souvenirs are also handed out to people. In Greece, they have the Moroni Festival, also known as the Phallus Festival. In Thailand, in a small town, they erect a massive effigy of a penis at the end of a small village road. Africa, in ancient Egypt, the city was renowned for its fertility rites dedicated to the god Men. These rites included processions, music, and rituals involving phallic symbolism and imagery, all aimed at ensuring fertility, prosperity, and abundance for the community. Ancient Egypt. Obelisks are seen as sacred symbols of the sun god Ra and were closely associated with the pharaohs. They were erected as monumental structures to honor pharaohs and represent its connection between the human and divine realms. The pointed apex of the obelisk, and we also have, let me keep reading here. The pointed apex of the obelisk symbolizes the rays of the sun, celestial body closely linked to notions of life beyond death. Roman Empire. During the Roman Empire, obelisks became symbols of conquest and were frequently transported from Europe to Rome as spoils of war. These ancient Egyptian obelisks were placed in prominent locations, such as public squares, and served as reminders of Rome's power and influence. Modern obelisks. Many obelisks are often oversized and are used as commemorative monuments. Other cultures throughout history, obelisks have been associated with concepts such as enlightenment, stability, and communication between dimensions. They are often seen as conduits of energy and sources of spiritual wisdom. The obelisk on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. was built to commemorate George Washington, a founding father of the United States, the victorious commander of the Continental Army from 1775 to 1783 in the American Revolutionary War, the war that we really lost, and the first president of the United States from 1789 to 1797. The obelisk is standing east of the reflecting pool and the Lincoln Memorial. The monument is made of blue genesis for the foundation and of granite for the construction. So why does Washington have the tallest obelisk in the world? Well, the other obelisks that are notable size is the Lateran obelisk in Rome, Italy. And that one is only 105 feet, whereas Washington is 555 feet. So the Lateran obelisk in Italy came from ancient Egypt. And then there's another obelisk in Paris, and that is only 75 feet. And the shortest one at 69 feet is called Cleopatra's Needle, and that one is over in the city of London. So that's basically where those obelisks are. So what I find interesting is the dates, right? And they got public funding after the Civil War. Congress took over the project. So yeah, right around that same time, right? So in Washington is kind of like a big deal. So they thought that Washington was a symbol of unity and Republican virtue. At a time when many feared monarchy or tyranny, Washington was seen as a selfless leader who refused to seize power after the war. His voluntary resignation of military power in 1783 and his refusal of kingship became legendary and earned international admiration. By the early 1800s, Washington was widely considered the ideal American citizen, courageous, humble, and honorable, and into Satan. I let add the last part. His legacy transcended party lines and made him a safe, unifying symbol in a politically divided young nation. The idea for a national monument began shortly after his death in 1799. Congress proposed a mausoleum, but political and financial disagreements. So it was revived in 1830. So yeah, they think he led the country to freedom. Where are we now? We're going to have troops on every corner. We're going to have the police on everywhere you look. There's going to be a cop pointing a machine gun at you. Yeah, this was really about peace now, wasn't it? So yeah, so Washington, no big deal. So we're going to be talking about, since we're talking about circumcision, listen carefully to this thing I'm going to be reading. This quote: "The gypsies are thieves and witches, feared for their knives and curses. The people say they dance for your money and stab you while you sleep. The gypsies are feared for their knives and curses, knives and knives." That came out of the Hunchback of Notre Dame, 1831. So, also remember this about Washington, D.C. We have Washington, D.C. with that huge phallic symbol right there, right in front of everybody's eyes, right? What is next to Washington, D.C.? Well, we have Virginia. And then on the other side of the big phallic symbol, we have Maryland. What does that mean? Virgin Mary? So why is Maryland and Virginia states that they named themselves? They didn't just happen to have these names, right? So yeah, they have Virginia and Maryland. Who's in Virginia? Well, the creeps from CIA. They're over in Virginia. The Virgin. I wonder what side of the ball those people are on. I can't help myself some days. So another thing I want to remind you of, gypsies, one of the biggest, they call it a slander against gypsies. They steal white children. Keep that in mind. So, they also say that Romani people are natural born liars, manipulators, and con artists. Remember, they thought at first they came from Egypt, right? Egypt, gypsy. They had this stereotype was first weaponized into law. For example, the first one was England's 1530 Egyptians Act. It banned Romanis from crafty devices and subtle dealings. So they called them Egyptians, right? We got Egyptians, we got phallic symbols, we got Nazis, we got Ashkenazi Jews with Nazi right there in their name. The Romani women were witches or supernatural seductresses. Romani camps spread disease, dirt, and plague. Romanis are unwilling to work and live off the state. Yeah, look at the way they do now. They go around robbing pension funds. They just unleashed a law so that these criminals running this private equity stuff, which hopefully I'll get to one of these days, everybody's retirement accounts are now going into hands of these gypsies because Roma are unwilling to work and live off the state. Yes, that's exactly who these psychopaths are in charge. They live off the state. They don't do any real work themselves. So Romans are a racial and degenerate people with no culture. Yes, here again, leave that open, leave that loose, right? No written records. Makes it even more interesting, right? So the Egyptian law of 1530 was pretty interesting. They called them Egyptians. So don't forget that part, okay? Then we had Cervantes, Don Quixote. A gypsy man or woman, young or old, is likely to be a thief by instinct and training. Cervantes portrayed gypsies with both admiration and suspicion, but reinforced the common standard that criminality was natural to their identity. And then we had the German legal code, the Holy Roman Empire of the 1500s. They said gypsies are robbers and spies who steal, cheat, and live by deceit. They are to be banished or killed. So, and then of course we had the hunchback of Notre Dame, the knives cutting us up, right? So this has to do with cutting us up. And how do you better way to cut a man than slice off part of his penis? There's another couple quotes I'll read you. A gypsy will steal the candle from the altar. Trust a snake before a gypsy. These were not only common phrases, but taught in rural families, passed down as folk wisdom. Yeah, my own family told me that when we were first stationed in Spain. The only thing my parents really said was, watch out for those gypsies. They steal children. And the interesting thing, which I'll get into later, was that literally there was a gypsy organization that was running a horse riding. Gypsies are into horses, right? They were running a horse riding stables right there where I could, as a young child, walk over there and ride horses with these gypsies. So yeah, so I guess they figured if they weren't riding around a caravan, they didn't notice they were gypsies. But anyway, so the gypsy slander, it started with monarchs and governments. So it started with Henry VIII started slandering the gypsies. Funny thing, huh? Holy Roman empires and in Nazi Germany. So yeah, gypsies have been, I would say, more slandered probably than the Jews. So, and let me read you some quotes from some Islamic leaders. They say circumcision is obligatory for both men and women. So, the founder of the considered circumcision as a legal obligation based on prophetic tradition and practice. So, yeah, they say circumcision is more emphasized for males and females. It is obligatory for males. So, um, and there's this thing about, I'll leave some of this for you to read down below about what some of these modern scholars say. But yeah, I think we get the bottom line here is that they were big on circumcising Muslim men. So you gotta ask yourself why. Well, what happens if you're a Muslim man and you're not circumcised? Well, in most Muslim majority countries, uncircumcised men are often heavily stigmatized, socially excluded, or pressured, sometimes violently to conform. While the Quran does not explicitly mandate circumcision, it is considered a sunnah, prophetic. That's a prophetic tradition. Sunnah, Sunnah. It has become deeply embedded in Muslim identity, especially in Arab, South Asia, and North African countries. So this is exactly why I kept looking at that map and thinking, why are all these people in this region? Because I was only looking to see because the U.S. is now at about 70% and Israel is 92 to 100. So I think we know why, right? So that's why I always say thinking isn't research, but it's a good place to get us started, right? So they say that boys and men may face intense pressure from family members, especially the elders. There may be mockery, bullying, or ostracism from peers during school, military service, or community events. So yeah, I just find it very interesting that the Jews got everybody circumcising. The United States is still circumcising. And now we have all these other Islam people that they're circumcising also, right? So it's also forced or pressured circumcision in adulthood. Men who convert to Islam and return to the faith are often expected to get circumcised even as adults. So, um, yeah, and there's this big thing between what day boys in Muslim families are usually circumcised young, as often between 7 days and 7 years. Refusing circumcision for one's child may lead to state intervention or community backlash. I think, let me see, let's get into the reality of what circumcision does. Immediate physical side effects. pain and stress response. My feeling is this: I feel like it invites a whole world of horrific trauma the minute that child is born. But I'll keep reading here. Stress and pain responses. Newborns experience intense pain during circumcision. It increases the cortisol levels and stress hormone spikes. May alter pain sensitivity in the future. Complications or medical risks: bleeding, infection, including systemic infection. So lots of issues with that. Lots and lots and lots of issues with that. So they have this thing of whether it's 7 days or 8 days. So I'm going to scroll down here. So in most Muslim majority countries, even today, uncircumcised men are often heavily stigmatized. So yes, and it's all because all this business that's been reinforced by this Muslim Brotherhood. I can't say that without the Muslim Brotherhood would have just gone away. I don't know. I would have no way of saying that and be pretty reckless to even mention it. But I do think that the Muslim Brotherhood kicked this thing into full speed gear. And if the Muslim Brotherhood is in fact the U.S. war machine, right? I would have to say that it's a pretty evil plot. So they sold this whole thing on whether it's clean or not clean and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, and being forced into circumcision in adulthood just sounds pretty radical, right? So they know it also. They've been doing some studies using EEG and MRI. Studies have shown that infants circumcised without anesthesia may have altered brain patterns associated with pain perception. They may have later responses to routine vaccinations. They may be amplified in babies who underwent circumcision without adequate pain relief. Psychological and emotional impact long term. Infant trauma and memory. While conscious memory may not form, early trauma is encoded somatically and neurologically. It may contribute to heightened anxiety, mistrust, or altered attachment patterns later in life. Some circumcised males report symptoms akin to PTSD, especially while learning about their procedures later in life. Feelings of violation or loss, particularly among those who become aware of the procedure later. Some men express anger or grief over a decision made for them without consent. And we're all adults here, so let's go into what this does. Sexual function and sensation, loss of nerve endings. The foreskin contains tens of thousands of nerve endings, including Meissner's corpuscles associated with fine touch sensitivity. Circumcision removes this tissue permanently. Decreased sensitivity over time. The glands, once internal and moist, become external and keratinized or hardened after circumcision, potentially reducing sensitivity. Difficulty with sexual lubrication. Loss of the foreskin can lead to reduced natural lubrication and reliance on artificial lubricants during intercourse. Lack of consent. Performing permanent genital surgery on a non-consenting infant is a central criticism from human rights and bioethics advocates. Circumcision has sparked debates around religious freedom versus body autonomy in countries like Germany, Denmark, and Iceland. Men circumcised in cultures where intact genitals are the norm or vice versa may feel isolated or self-conscious. Relationship impact. Differences in sexual sensitivity or emotional responses to circumcision may affect intimacy and communication in relationships. While circumcision is often performed for religious, cultural, or medical reasons, its potential harm, especially when done in infancy without consent, includes physical complications, neurological and psychological trauma, loss of sexual function and sensation, ethical concerns over autonomy and body integrity. Many historians and researchers argue that circumcision serves as a form of control of individuals, sexuality, and even entire populations. Yes, psychopaths, it is all about control. So I'm going to take a quick break here. I will be back on the other side with more.
Okay, I'm back. And I don't know if it relates or not, but it's something that I've been thinking about. For example, Macron recently, it was 2017, he did a official portrait and it came up because Candace Owen, that person on social media, I'm Candace Owen. I'm here to tell you the truth. Anyway, Candace Owen has been talking about it because she is the one who is claiming that Macron's wife is really a man. Well, of course she is. But anyway, so they have this fascination with young black boys. And maybe they want to enforce circumcision. So I don't know. Anyway, um, so these things are very well staged, okay? And there was a very disturbing photo taken of Macron. It was his presidential photo taken on 2017, June 29th, 2017. And positioned on his desk were three books. The one book, the disturbing one, was written by a man named Andre Gide, Gide. And the book is about his pride in his attraction to young boys, especially during his travels in North Africa. So yeah, so odd that he would put that on his desk, right when the picture is getting taken. So, and the person, the sicko Giddy who wrote this book, also won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1947. And I guess they call it pedophilic abuse. In other words, raping young children or young boys. So, yeah, there's something very sick with all these people, and their deal with young boys is, of course, very concerning and has been for a long time for me because everybody wants to leave the boys out of this picture. They're also busy talking about the women being raped, which obviously is a very significant thing to talk about, right? But we got to bring the boys and the men into this picture. So it came out of that Candace Owen thing. So I did look into it, and yeah, the book is called The Fruits of the Earth, and it was on his official portrait desk, and some interpreted it as a nod to intellectual freedom and literary heritage. However, for those familiar with Giddy's biography, it struck a deep disconnect chord and association with a man who not only admitted but celebrated abusive relationships with boys, especially in the colonial world. This whole thing about circumcision is, in fact, about control. So while I have your attention on this thing and who said it, Candace Owens, none of these people are who they say they are, right? Her husband, she's married to a man named George Farmer. He derives much of his wealth from his family's legacy in commodities trading, complemented by his own business ventures in polling, consulting, and technology. His net worth has been reported in the hundreds of millions, though exact figures vary by source. So yeah, that's who brought this story. They all talk about each other because she essentially is, in fact, one of them, right? They want your time, they want control of all of your time, and they want to bring you into their sales organization, right? The good gypsies they are, their families surround people to get every penny they can out of you. So anyway, so let's get back to the subject for today. So many researchers, historians, and critics argue, and I don't know why this sound is different. I can tell on the bar over here that it's not recorded the same way, but nothing I can do about it. But anyway, so many researchers, historians, and critics argue that circumcision serves as a form of control of individuals, sexuality, and even entire populations. So, for example, circumcision as population control, control of male sexuality. The foreskin is one of the most sensitive parts of the male body. Removing it reduces penile sensitivity, which can blunt sexual pleasure and emotional bonding, diminish a man's autonomous relationship to his body and desires. This can lead to assertive or rebellious this can lead to less assertive or rebellious sexual behavior, which may be desirable for authoritarian cultures or religious systems. Early trauma and psychological conditioning. Infant circumcision often involves extreme pain and trauma at a time when the brain is still forming. This can lead to results in long-term changes to the nervous system, potentially leading to emotional disassociation, reduced empathy, or passive behavior. Early trauma can still instill unconscious compliance, making people more submissive to authority later in life. Symbol of ownership. Circumcision marks the body permanently. In many traditions, it's seen as a branding or initiation into a group or system, religious, national, or medical. Yeah, of course it is, because to be part of these Islamic groups, you're going to get shunned if you're not circumcised, right? So, pretty big deal. This is similar to tattoos for slaves, branding of cattle, or rights in cults and military units. It signals your body belongs to us first, not to you. So, why do so many countries supposedly still do it? Well, religious doctrine. In Judaism and Islam, circumcision is a covenant or commandment. Questioning it is often taboo. Once it's embedded in religious law, it becomes self perpetuating, passed from one generation to the next without question. In the 19th and 20th century, circumcision was promoted in English speaking countries like the UK, USA, and Australia to prevent masturbation, which was seen as sinful or dangerous. It promotes cleanliness in a moralistic and radicalized way. It was medicalized as a religious rite, repackaging it as hygiene and discipline. And this is a really fascinating part. The U.S. military, for example, routinely circumcised recruits until the late 20th century. This promoted uniformity, control, and desensitization, aligning with militarized values. In some developing countries, circumcision campaigns are funded by Western NGOs under the banner of HIV prevention, despite disputed evidence and ethical concerns. In countries like the U.S., infant circumcision generates millions in annual revenue from procedures. The follow up surgeries and foreskin derived products are used in cosmetics and research. Yeah, of course they are. Everything gets then resold, right? It provides harvested tissue without consent that's used in biomedical industries. Philosopher Michael Foucault coined the term biopolitics, the way governments and institutions control populations through the body. Circumcision is a clear example. It imposes values on bodies before individuals can resist. It creates biological compliance, muted sensation, early trauma, and loss of control over one's most intimate part. It reinforces conformity within a society, religion, or state. So it is about control. Circumcision, especially infant circumcision, is deeply tied to control, control of bodies, control of sexual experience, control of identity, and conformity. Control through trauma and submission. So your first image is these people standing over that poor little baby boy with knives on their penis, their foreskin, doing this surgery while the baby screams like crazy. Of course, the mother is never invited into the room, right? They want to keep all of this hidden. And at the same time, that baby then gets shot up with all kinds of vaccines for sexually transmitted diseases for an infant. Who does this kind of stuff? Well, a psychopathic country that's trying to get rid of the rest of us does this kind of stuff. We have stood by and let it all happen. We have a responsibility to fixing some of these things. We at least need to acknowledge the people that were so very, very harmed by all of this and show some solidarity and support to all of this, because possibly there may be a lot of people that are recovering their own memories and don't even know the trauma they had, because you're a young infant lying there. You're surrounded by these people. You don't even know them. You just arrived on this planet, right? And then you're screaming like crazy. Your mother doesn't come to get you, and you get this early trauma like, why didn't anybody rescue me, right? So I think that's why powerful institutions, the religious people, the medical people, the military people, and the governments have historically promoted circumcising tiny, tiny babies. They frame it as hygiene or tradition. The deeper function is often about owning and conditioning the male population from birth. So, what is the sunnah? The sunnah in Islam, and that was the clip you heard at the beginning, refers to the tradition and practices of the Prophet Muhammad. A sunnah act is not obligatory, but is considered highly recommended and meritorious. Male circumcision is considered an important rite in Islam. It is seen as a fitrah, natural practice, and is often religiously, hygienically, and culturally encouraged. According to some hadiths and classical scholars, circumcising a boy on the seventh day after birth is considered ideal. However, there is no fixed required day in Islamic law, and the timing can vary. Some Muslims perform it on the seventh day, following the example of the Prophet. Others may wait weeks or months or even until puberty, depending on family, region, or health considerations. In Judaism, circumcision is also performed on the eighth day unless medically delayed. This similarity may reflect shared Abrahamic roots, but the Islamic practice is not bound to the eighth day and is more flexible. Yeah, they're all the same because the same people wrote this whole Bible, that wrote this whole story, right? They claim that ancient Egypt tomb paintings show circumcision, likely for ritual purity, priesthood, or elite identity. Yeah, supposedly. Sub-Sahara Africa, prehistoric, practiced by many tribal groups as a rite of passage into adulthood. Semitic peoples, pre-Judaism, early Semitic tribes often practiced circumcision prior to Jewish codification. So, if that's a story they tell, well, that's a story they tell, right? They say the Islamic circumcision was adopted in the 7th century CE. It's not explicitly mentioned in the Quran based on hadith. It's viewed as part of cleanliness. See, there it goes, right? Became near universal in Muslim communities globally. So yeah, there's other people that practice it, but basically they claim it started with the Egyptians, then transferred to the Africans as a tribal deal, and then Semitic tribes, then of course the Jews, and then of course everybody else, right? So key phases, excuse me, they had the prehistoric, the ancient Near East, the classic antiquity, the Islamic expansion. So yeah, and then the Western medicalization happened in the 19th to 20th century. The UK and the USA adopted, for moral and health reasons, adopted circumcision, right? And they also did it because they said it would prevent masturbation. And I did a show about that years ago. Kellogg's, the people that, the Kellogg's cereal, he had a whole thing about making boys not want to masturbate. Well, I guess I don't know. I don't understand the twisted logic. So, anyways, there was also a public health campaign about the who you going to call and the UN AIDS. They promoted circumcision to reduce HIV transmission, and that led to mass campaigns in Kenya, Uganda, South Africa, and Tanzania. Quite effective campaigns, if you ask me, because you look at these figures and boy, oh boy, there are, I mean, they're really heavily, those African nations are very, very heavily into the circumcision. But the Jews did not invent circumcision. It supposedly existed in Egypt and tribal Africa before 1800 BCE. Judaism institutionalized it as a covenant act tied to identity and faith. Islam universalized it across large swaths of the global post 7th century. Western medicine and public health further expanded or reduced its practice depending on context. Modern trends show both rising rates in Africa for HIV prevention and declining rates in Europe. And yeah, the white people are shunning are getting rid of the circumcision, but they're going full gun ahead against the black communities, right? If you're a person of color, these people really, well, they're trying to hide their own past. So of course that is what they're doing, right? So anyhow, so yeah, you got Judaism in the picture and you got the Islam in the picture. So the partitioning of the Middle East, primarily after the fall of the Ottoman Empire following World War I, had deep and lasting effects on Islamic religions, societies, and political dynamics. While Islam as a faith was not partitioned, the political division of Muslim lands by European powers created artificial national boundaries that severely disrupted Islamic unity, authority structures, and religious cohesion. So, yes, of course, that is how it all works, right? They go in, they messed up all the religions, they took all the borders away, some families ended up living on one side of the border and the other. I've already done a show about that, but it's all about the divide and rule tactics. So, for example, in Iraq, the British empowered the Sunni minority over the Shia majority. In Lebanon, France institutionalized sectarianism in government. So, the impact, deepening sectarian resentment, encouraged the politicalization of Islamic sects, planted seeds for future civil wars, coups, and insurgencies. And that was why they created Israel in 1948. First, they're going to go in and get everything all set up, right? Which they did after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. So, the rise of intensification of male circumcision practices in the Islamic world after the Middle East post World War I was less about a new adoption of the practice, since circumcision was already well established in Islam, but more about its growing symbolic and political importance in response to colonialism, secularism, an identity crisis. So, yeah, so they said, hey, we're tired of being ruled by these people. Come join the Muslim Brotherhood. And part of that, let's give you all circumcision. So, yeah, after European powers carved up Muslim majority regions via mandates and protectorates, local populations often reasserted Islamic practices, including circumcision, as markers of religious and cultural identity. So, Yeah, so in Algeria, under French rule, the circumcision ceremonies became acts of cultural resistance and a rite of defiance against French attempts at assimilation. In Palestine, Iraq, and Egypt, and other British French controlled territories, traditional Islamic practices were emphasized by families and local leaders as a form of cultural preservation. The rise of Islamic revivalism, 1930s to 1970s, following the fall of the caliphate in 1924, that was Ottoman going away, and the rise of secular Arab nationalism, groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, which of course was founded in 1928, began promoting Islamic values and rituals, including circumcision, as part of re Islamicizing society. As governments like Turkey under Ataturk banned Islamic dress, Sharia, and Arabic script, private religious acts like circumcision grew in symbolic weight, especially in more conservative or rural populations. Yeah, they flipped it into something everybody wanted to get, right? In response to Western cultural encroachment, circumcision rituals were often celebrated publicly, reaffirming masculinity, piety, and belonging. In some countries, mass circumcision ceremonies grew more common post partition, sometimes sponsored by religious institutions or charities, especially in poor communities. Then we have the medicalization and the institutionalization. As Western medical systems spread in colonial and post colonial states, circumcision gradually became integrated into hospital procedures, still driven by religious obligation, but now with state or NGO involvement. Some post independent Muslim governments like Egypt, Indonesia, and Pakistan promoted circumcision within public health frameworks, sometimes with religious overtones. There was a Sunni Shia divergences post partition. The sectarian boundaries sharpened post partition and also influenced circumcision practices and timing. Sunni Muslims usually circumcise boys at younger ages, infancy to early childhood. Shia Muslims, especially in Iran and southern Iraq, often circumcise boys between the ages of 7 and 10 years old. These differences became more visible as sectarian identity solidified in nation states like Iraq, Lebanon, and Bahrain, sometimes politicizing the act of circumcision. As Muslim populations boomed in the 20th century and rural populations migrated to cities, more families began accessing organized circumcision services, including government sponsored or mosque sponsored clinics. In countries like Turkey, Egypt, and Indonesia, urban mass circumcision events, often with Islamic and nationalistic symbolism, became increasingly prominent from the 1950s to the 1980s. So, circumcision was always part of Islam, but after the Middle East was partitioned, its symbolic power increased. It became a marker of Islamic identity in the face of colonialism, secularized, and national fragmentation. The practice evolved from private ritual to cultural resistance, from traditional medicine to medicalized public rites, from quiet tradition to overt reaffirmation of religious belonging. So yeah, and I have all the lists and data down below. I'm not going to read every single one of them, but I think what you'll notice, for example, countries like Morocco has a 99.9% rate of circumcision, that is really, really high. So there's a lot of countries of male circumcision is above 99%. And that's Morocco, Palestine, Afghanistan, Tunisia, Iran, Western Sahara, Comora, Mauritania, Gabon, and Yemen. All of those countries are 99% or above circumcised. So a 2016 study titled Estimation of Country Specific and Global Prevalence of Male Circumcision compared data for circumcised mature males in 237 countries and territories around the world. And that's where they found those 12 countries that had over 99, which tallied circumcision rates higher than 99%, while more than 50 additional countries posted rates of less than 99%. So, yeah, what I noticed, and obviously this is about everybody coming up with their own ideas, right? What I noticed was that the circumcision certainly, at least appeared to me in that whole region to be on the incline, right? Um, ascent, incline. Anyway, so you get what I'm saying, but so they're effectively getting more people in that region to get circumcised because even Philippines and Bangladesh, they have 90 to 95%. But then we look at South Korea, that's only 60 to 70%. And India overall is only 13%, where our favorite people, the gypsies, come from. Huh. But it's 100% among Muslims in India. So yeah, in the United States is sitting right now about 70%. Um, and they claim it's for medical hygiene, not religious, and varies by region. Canada is only at 30%. So you start to notice UK, France, and Germany 20%. So yeah, Scandinavia 5%. So Russia only 12%. So, yeah, this is just my impression. Obviously, I'm sharing my work, so you can have your own impressions about this stuff. But it suspiciously, and I mean really suspiciously, looks to me like they got all the dark-skinned people, right? Well, they created white people around that time, so that shouldn't be. So the Jews preserved the right despite persecution, and Christianity rejected it for salvation. So yeah, there's a lot to this whole Christian and Jewish thing. But anyway, so um, it's interesting that the U.S. definitely has the United States at 70% is definitely much, much higher than the other white countries that you'll take a look at that list for. So before I close, I need to talk about the Bible, my favorite book. Where do they talk about um, circumcision in the Bible? Well, in the Old Testament of the Hebrew Bible. And the origin was a covenant with Abraham. And God commands Abraham to circumcise himself and all male descendants. Circumcision becomes a sign of the covenant between God and the people of Israel. See how that, okay, so circumcision becomes the sign of the covenant between God and the people of Israel, required on the 8th day after birth for every male. Uncircumcised males are to be cut off from the people, and that's all from Genesis. And it says, "This is my covenant which you shall keep. Every male among you, excuse me, every male among you shall be circumcised." And that was Genesis 17:10. And then there was a law of Moses, Leviticus 12:3, reaffirms circumcision on the 8th day. So then Jesus in circumcision, Jesus was circumcised on the 8th day according to Jewish law. So, yeah, supposedly the Apostle Paul challenged circumcision as a requirement for salvation, especially for Gentiles or the non-Jewish converts. So, but in Romans, in the Bible, Paul promotes the idea of circumcision of the heart by the Spirit. He argues that faith in Christ is what matters, not rituals like circumcision. And the quote is, "For neither circumcision nor uncircumcision means anything. What counts is the new creation." So yeah, so the Bible has, been in there on it, but here's what they think now. They're thinking now, I got to scroll down to find this. They're thinking now that um, they say emphasize circumcision of the heart, meaning obedience and internal devotion, not just physical ritual. Circumcise your hearts, therefore, and do not stiff necks any longer. I don't know what any of this stuff means, but anyway, so Jesus was circumcised on the 8th day according to Jewish law. So the Apostle Paul challenged circumcision as a requirement for salvation. But basically, what their thought is now, the Christians the Christians' mainstream beliefs on circumcision today, it's not required for salvation. Most Christian denominations teach that physical circumcision is not required. This belief is based on New Testament teachings. The emphasis is on spiritual transformation or circumcision of the heart. So, generally, they see circumcision as irrelevant spiritually. Some may oppose infant circumcision on ethical or non biblical grounds. Others may accept it culturally or medically, especially in the U.S., where it's common. So the Catholic Church does not promote or require circumcision. In fact, one of the popes stated it is morally permissible, no, excuse me, it is morally permissible only for hygienic or medical reasons, not religious ones. Pretty funny, huh? Now they're Eastern Orthodox strongly emphasizes, so what they're doing now is they're viewing circumcision as part of the old covenant, and it's been replaced by baptism or Eucharist. So they're saying that baptism is the way to go. Well, baptism comes from their figure Baphomet, right? Baptism is basically turning over your soul during some other ceremony. So so that's all I know about circumcision and penises and all this other stuff to talk about today. What I would like to suggest is that if you're ever in a need of somebody to talk to you and maybe you don't have access to people that will really hear what you're saying, try not to put yourself into a position where people who will ridicule you or maybe not be there to really hear what you're saying. So if you find yourself in the need of somebody to talk to, I suggest talking to yourself and not in some kind of creepy way, but start journaling. You would be amazed at how much you will uncover by the simple act of journaling. I like to journal on my laptop because I can type very fast. So I would strongly recommend you consider journaling. Do it at times that you feel safe to do it. And do not edit it while you're going along. Just let your words flow and see what comes up. So while you're writing along your thoughts, just be fluid about it. I had an experience with journaling. I had something very disturbing happen to me around the time of the lawsuit against Intel. And what happened was somebody who I thought was my friend. um, I was trying to decide if I should sue Intel for them stealing my work or not. And my friend, who I thought was my friend, invited me to dinner. Well, after dinner, I realized that his whole purpose was to set me up to find out what I was going to do because he was a top key person at Intel. So I was so traumatized by the fact of what this friend had done to me that I actually wrote it down and I put the note away. I did not remember that incident of that particular trauma until 5 years later when the lawsuit was over and I was packing to move. I found my old notes. And when I read my notes, I had said exactly what was going on at the time. I laid out my suspicions and my heartbreak over this person who was supposedly my friend that would set me up on behalf of the corporate interest, right? But that's how it works. But it was a big blow to me, and it was right at the time when I was deciding to sue Intel or not. And actually, it was what tipped me over the edge because I thought, well, if you're going to treat me this way, I'm going full force ahead. You've answered my questions, right? I can't trust any of you people, and that's when I led to me starting with this work. So by the time I left Silicon Valley, I knew they were all psychopaths. I just didn't know how bad the problem was across this country. So I really encourage you to write down your thoughts. Keep them in a safe place, obviously, but consider journaling and just see what comes up. I had my forum for many years, and the victims really benefited by just a simple fact. They showed up, they wrote down their stories, they were in a non confrontational environment. No one was going to ridicule them. They told their stories, and almost every one of them said the same thing. They said, I would not have seen this had I not written it down, because when I read it back, I saw things that were so clear to me that I did not have access to just by thinking about it. So we're entering a time and phase that I don't know. Personally, I have a real prejudice against therapists. I'm not saying they're all bad by any means, but all I'm saying is that maybe we consider taking things into our own hands. And how we do that is we start, first of all, by listening. When somebody tells you something, try to be completely present in that situation. So I'm going to be signing off for now. Hopefully, I'll be back in a few days. I need to get some rest and talk about it's a fascinating story how they all started in Russia, Ukraine, right there with those Romanovs. Cue the gypsy music. So yeah, I got so boggled down. I was going to do this circumcision part on that, and I thought, oh wait a minute, this thing is just really getting complicated. So anyhow, so thanks for hearing me out. Yeah, they really seem to have this thing about phallic symbols. And yeah, they seem to be very quick to want to take away the rights and the ability of functioning of that same phallic symbol from people who happen to be in Muslim countries, right? That's the whole connection. And they were able to trick a lot of the Muslims by convincing them in Africa that it was HIV related, right? They kind of short circuited the religious thing in Africa. They could scare the daylights out of everybody by cooking up the HIV deal, right? So, yeah. And, I don't know. I can see the clear path. I have a lot of notes on my website that I'm not going to be going over today. So, if you want to know more, you could literally write a book about this particular juncture in time. I find it the most significant thing that I've uncovered today. A lot of people are talking about, not a lot, but I mean, if you go in the blog world, you'll find people are very aware of who started the Muslim Brotherhood and all that. I mean, the cat's out of the bag. I mean, people know that the U.S. or the elites are behind all of these terrorist organizations. They, in fact, created them. And I think today provides some pretty solid evidence. So, why at that particular point in time? Because they were just taking over, getting ready to take over. So, yeah, so it's interesting. They would move in and go after the masculinity of the real men who were in those regions in such a brutal and I don't know. I'm really having still a very hard time processing this when you look at the size of the population in that whole part of the world and to think of all the terrorizing of the men in that area under the guise of, oh, yeah, come, we'll circumcise you because we want you to be a good militant. I mean, I guess the U.S. got sold on the fact that it's dirty and you need to clean things up and you got to circumcise or they're going to be, filthy and dirty and stuff. And then they got the rest of the world convinced it was religious. And then it becomes your right to be a man, right? In the meantime, you're doing something which is 100% the opposite of what being a man is really all about, right? I mean, let's face facts. Let's talk like adults here. So they really considered and they got that whole region into this sick plot that the size of it is still I'm still having some problems processing all of this in my brain. So thank you for allowing me to share with you my jungle of thoughts over all of this because it's pretty intense. And then you add all the phallic symbols all the times and the dick jokes and all this kind of stuff. And something is really rotten in this world, and we all know who's at the head of the rottenness. And I don't know. It just makes me feel terrible for all of the broken lives that they've created. But that is the way to destroy us, destroy our DNA, our will to live and keep going. And remember, try to block your energy. Energy is very powerful. I have my energy completely blocked from all this madness. So it's important to block your energy. And while you're here, we're here 100% to learn and to grow. Keep learning, keep moving, and keep growing. And for goodness sake, be safe out there. And I'll talk to you later. Goodbye for now.